Hello and welcome to a discussion on the topic Religion and Postmodernism. Before deliberating on the topic in its entirety, let me first throw some light on the religious scene of the modern world. You see, the contemporary religious scene is clouded with conflicting trends and hence it appears to be a subject of bemusement for today's social scientists. It is difficult to understand these religious trends. They can be best captured either by secularization theory or by the revival of spirituality or by decreasing traditional religiosity or by rising fundamentalism. However, when viewed through a postmodernist approach, these trends appear to make a far better and more distinct sense. Any discussion on postmodernism would remain incomplete if I don't briefly review what modernism is about. To encapsulate modernism is a philosophical movement that started roughly in the 17th century and became popular in the late 19th and early 20th centuries in the Western societies. Some implications of modernism are the modern nation state, reasoning or rationality over tradition and faith, human rights, free markets, etc., all of which widely prevail even today. Let me discuss some ideas of modernism as expounded by renowned figures for a clearer understanding. First, I begin with that of Professor David Harvey. David Harvey was a professor of anthropology and geography who explained the purposes of the modern project in his book The Condition of Postmodernity, an Inquiry into the Origins of Cultural Change. Harvey wrote that modernism aimed to make use of the knowledge produced by those who work freely and creatively for the purpose of man's well-being. Just as different drawbacks of nature are conquered by the scientific domination of nature, in the same way man's impractical modes of thought, myths and superstitions can also be overthrown with the help of rational social organizations and refined modes of thought. Therefore, it is only through modernism that the universal and unchangeable aspects of humanity get exposed. To quote Harvey, modernism was a secular movement that sought the demystification and desacralization of knowledge and social organization in order to liberate human beings from their chains. Next, I would like to brief about the ideas of modernism of an eminent German sociologist and philosopher Jürgen Habermas. In his book Modernity, an Incomplete Project, Habermas wrote that early modernists not only expected that arts and sciences would champion the control of natural forces, but would also develop an understanding of the world, of the self, moral progress, human happiness, etc. Therefore, through his ideas, Habermas re-established that modernism was indeed a beneficial project that, alongside developing man's creativity, would also emancipate his changed spirit. There are, of course, certain limitations of modernism. Besides the variety of advantages I briefly spoke about, the different postulates of modernism began to be questioned in the early 19th century. In fact, the movement was considered as spiritually weakening and damaging. While on one hand there was radical development in the fields of art, natural sciences, intellectual pursuits and other branches of scholarship, on the other there were assassinations and death camps too. Thus, we find that although modernism altered our traditional beliefs and way of thinking, it failed to fight such kinds of political barbarity and brutality. In this section, I will discuss about how it came to be rejected by the alternative postmodernist school of thought. Although the postmodernist school of thought considers the project of modernism to be highly exemplary, it also believes that over time modernism has come to overpower humankind by channeling it into certain given ways of action. Also, postmodernism laid down such undeniable consequences of modernism like colonialism, communism, mass exterminations, destruction of natural resources in the name of unbounded progress and technology, etc. Therefore, keeping all of this in mind, the postmodernists rejected the modern project both in a theoretical way and in an applied manner. First, coming to postmodernism's theoretical rejection to modernism, it can be noted that there is a rejection of most of the cultural certainties that have structured life in the Western societies for a handful of centuries. Particularly speaking, there is the questioning of the existence of any truth and how far human reason is able to find it out. Also, postmodernism holds that different people have different narratives because they vary intellectually, economically, as well as sociologically. It is thus the postmodern comparison of narratives that overrules the modern search for truth. Speaking of postmodernism's applied rejection to modernism, it is to be noted that no individual narrative has the right to dismiss other narratives. Postmodernism inquires about the main maxims of modern political economy, where the modern nation state is viewed as an agent of centralized oppression of minorities, with reason being the voice of the powerful who always force upon their personal views on others' narratives. Apart from these, the layout of free markets is designed in such a way that reaps benefits for these power holders who can multiply their wealth through fraudulent, unscrupulous methods like mass consumerism. In addition, the command over nature through science and technology in the name of mankind's progress has become a justification for large-scale damage of natural landscapes and disruption of our ecosystems. It is difficult to assume that individuals and religious groups have unequivocally adopted postmodernism as a personal philosophy. This is because there are many people who are not even aware that they live and act in a postmodern world. However, they act as if this were the situation, and therefore current religious trends suitably fit within the frame of postmodernism. Three trends can be spoken of. First, the downturn of the churches. Second is a restoration of sorts from authority to expression, and third is a fundamentalist retaliation. All of these will be discussed separately. Coming to the first trend, that is the downturn of the churches, let me first talk about secularization. You see, secularization is one of the most conspicuous outcomes of postmodernism. There were some early theories of secularization that correctly predicted a diminution of the significance of mainstream religious and traditional participation, besides predicting a religious renunciation from the public square. In fact, there is literary evidence too that supports this change. The change that mainstream religion is on the decline for the past century. This is true especially in Western Europe, where there is a remarkable fall in the number of Christian churches. In this regard, George Weigel, an American author and political and social activist, writes that Europe has increasingly become Christophobic. That is, it denies religion in favor of an exclusive humanism, a humanism that asserts to be neutral toward worldviews. Weigel also adds that Europeans believe that in order to be modern and free, it is important to be radically secular. Thus, postmodernism offered the nail to what modernity already did. It impaired the importance of institutional religion by replacing faith's uniqueness with reason. I now come to the second trend, which is about a religious restoration of sorts from authority to expression. Well, if you minutely study the current religious trends, you will find that there are a number of new religious forms that surfaced along with the rise of postmodernism. Although in the last section I discussed about how there has been a remarkable fall in participation in institutional practices of religion, it cannot be said that there is an outright drop in man's religiosity. You must be acquainted with the idea of consumers in the market, that is, consumers for goods and services. Just as there are these consumers present, there are also consumers of religion. These consumers of religion find new and alternative ways of feeling and expressing their religious ideas and observance. In this way, more personal and alternative forms of religion have emerged. People have tended to shift their religious ideas from something rooted in organized and institutional worship to a self-made spirituality based on experience. This belief, rather, this spirituality claims no philosophical conformity. As Robert Bella and others have put in their words, religion is now habits of the heart and lack any proper formalistic definition. For a clearer understanding, let me come to different views on contemporary religious practice as have been propounded down by different authors. First, I would like to speak of the idea of Nancy Ammerman, a professor of sociology of religion at Boston University. Ammerman spoke of Christians in her study, showing in her work that Christians increasingly use the services of several churches and religious organizations, but they do not adhere to any. Second, I would like to talk of Barger's idea in this connection. Peter Barger, in his famous work The Sacred Canopy, views the present day religious world as a supermarket, that is to say, a place where the customers come and shop for those items that would meet their necessities. Third comes the perspective of Reginald Beebe, a Canadian sociologist, who sees religion as a set of consumer items available a la carte. Beebe emphasizes that in the contemporary world, there is more of religious consumption than religious commitment. In fact, this shift is remarkably noticed today. Fourth is Paul Hillers, a British sociologist and anthropologist, who has written of how the boundaries between the religious and the sacred faded in the postmodern era. Hillers also explains how spiritual experience has become more significant than belief in this postmodern era. Talking of how spirituality has gained prominence over belief, I would now like to mention about Wade Clark Roof, an American professor of religious studies. Roof refers to religious consumers as seekers as they move from one religion to another to find meaning and contentment. This unceasing movement of religious consumers, rather seekers, is denoted by the catchphrase, "I am not religious, but I am very spiritual." The idea of the Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor needs a special mention here. Taylor has put forth the general cultural trend is such that every man has the right to develop his own form of life based on his own sense of what is important to him. To sum up, it can be said that there is no refusal of the fact that people do want to maintain a personal relationship with God, but at the same time, as Stephanie Nolan, a Canadian journalist, puts it, people today look for an easier, faster, no fuss, rather microwavable God. Coming to the third trend, that is a fundamentalist backlash or retaliation, I'd first like to state that the term fundamentalism itself generates quite a great deal of controversy in literature. The term is widely used by those who seek their identity by providing resistance to the modern world order. It must be remembered that the idea of fundamentalism cannot be considered as a postmodernist idea or a postmodernist phenomenon. This is because fundamentalism rejects both modernist idea of secularism as well as postmodernist idea of rejection of truth. To describe it as a pre-modern idea would perhaps be the best way, since it dates back to the time when both faith and authority dominated. However, it remains as a reaction to the radical relativism of postmodernism. If we are to talk of how and when fundamentalism emerged, it becomes necessary to refer to the time when modernist ideals prevailed. This is because alongside the development of modernity, there was also a development of the rationality of human beings. Thus, it was speculated that people would no longer require religion in their daily life or would restrain it to the immediate personal and private areas of their life. This was the idea that predominated during the time of modernity. But later, in the late 1970s, fundamentalists opposed this secularly supreme belief and re-established the dignity of religion. Thus, fundamentalism was a response to the moral questions raised by modernity and postmodernism, and in this way it became a reaction to postmodernism. There are, of course, many interpretations on the idea of fundamentalism, more specifically on how fundamentalism surfaced. First, David Lyon views fundamentalism as a reaction to the waning institutional and doctrinal influence and side by side a rise in individual interpretation. Second, Paul Hillers explains that the disintegration of modernist principles led to such a situation where postmodern religion can prosper. And last, Zygmunt Bauman, a renowned Polish sociologist, opined that the appeal of fundamentalism actually arises from its promise to free the converted from the sufferings of their choice. Apart from the interpretations to the view of fundamentalism, as have already been spoken about, there are of course some contradictions to this view as well. There is ample literary evidence which shows that there is a remarkable decline in mainstream religion with a parallel rise in fundamentalism. Much like postmodernism, first questioned and then rejected the modern project. The rise in fundamentalism too can be seen as a reaction to both modernism and postmodernism. In the present day, this rise in fundamentalism goes far beyond traditional religious forces to bring together those who are stressed by a decline in values and morality. It is important to consider certain other questions. These are fundamentalism and other world religions, unchanged creeds, changing beliefs, and lastly, appraising postmodernism. If one is under the impression that the notion of fundamentalism is only present in Christianity, one is wrong. You see, fundamentalism is present in other world religions too. First, let me talk of Islam. As I speak of it, a number of questions might ring in your mind, like how does Islam fit into modernity or in postmodernism, and whether Iran or Turkey is more symbolic of contemporary Islam? You see, fundamentalism is at its strongest in Islam. This is what the British Czech philosopher and social anthropologist Ernst Gellner affirmed. In fact, Islam also disapproves of the modern world's scientific technological culture and the nation state. Islamic enthusiasts often tend to associate postmodernism with American civilization or Americanization, anarchy, and other adversities. It is thus evident that the phenomena of modernization and westernization have complicated matters for Muslims. But there always lies the possibility that Islam will eventually acknowledge modernity, just like certain segments of Christianity did. In this context, Dr. Khalid Abu el-Fadl, a distinguished Islamic jurist and scholar, opined that, like other religious traditions whose origins lie in the pre-modern era and scripturally based, Islam is neither more nor less compatible with modern democracy than Christianity or Judaism. Speaking of Judaism, it has very often been contended that the term fundamentalism is not pertinent to Judaism. This could be because for a Jew, authority or power is sanctioned in the oral Torah, that is, in the elucidation of the Bible now found in the rabbinic literature, but this interpretation is debatable and is oft questioned. Two questions come to mind instantly. First, is there no Jewish fundamentalism? And second, if Jewish fundamentalism at all exists, how can it be explicated? Addressing the first question, let me state that, of course, the notion of fundamentalism is present in Judaism too, much like Christianity and Islam. But unlike these religions, there is no distinct and organized group in Judaism that staunchly advocate fundamentalism to differentiate itself from the rest of the community. Addressing the second question of how Jewish fundamentalism is to be explicated or defined, let me now state that Jewish fundamentalism is that attitude which recognizes neither any development nor any human participation in the transmission of the Torah. The truth is simply handed down from generation to generation without any alterations. The perspective is strictly traditional. By traditional, I mean the attitude that prevailed before the arrival and emancipation of the Jews in the Western society. At present, the issue depends on whether the new situation demands a radical reassessment of the Jews' doctrine and of the Torah, rather than making simple amendments in the externals of the post-modern Jew's life. I would now like to speak of one of the oldest and major world religions in this section, the religion of Hinduism. Hinduism, as Klostermaier writes, is the oldest living major tradition on earth, with roots reaching back into the prehistory of mankind. Klostermaier is a renowned researcher in Hinduism and Indian history and culture, as well as an elected distinguished professor. You see, there is no one church, no one book, or no one prophet that can speak for Hinduism. And so, the possibility of Hinduism's association with fundamentalism appears to be almost impossible. Let me elaborate a little. First, Hindus are not of one single faith. They are classified into Shaivites, Vaishnavas, Shaktas, Smartas, and a number of other groups which are remodeled as modern gurus. Second, there is no specific holy book or prophet as such in the religion of Hinduism. Thus, these 2 points evince that Hinduism is too pluralistic a religion to possibly be fundamentalist. Next, that is the third point is, unlike Christianity and Islam, Hinduism does not have a violent history, and this suffices the fact that it has not reached itself out beyond the Indian subcontinent. But can we infer that there is absolutely no trace of fundamentalism in Hinduism? I fear not. In the present day, we will find a number of Hindu movements and organizations having the same scheme as those organizations that are strictly fundamentalist. These organizations call for the protection, promotion and propagation of the Hindu society and its values, to the extent that actions often take an extreme and violent turn. The destruction of the Babri Mosque in Ayodhya by Vishwa Hindu Parishad activists is a good example. In fact, as you might be aware, the forbid clash between Hindus and Muslims regarding the Babri Mosque had left thousands of people injured and even dead. Thus, we see that although fundamentalism initiated with Protestant groups and spread to assimilate all other Christians, It also expanded its boundaries to other world religions that are much more associated with militancy like Islam and Judaism. Also, by the look of things in India, Hinduism too is eventually becoming more and more prone to the fundamentalist ways of thinking. You see, associating any religion with fundamentalism does not necessarily imply that that particular religion is being critiqued. Rather, it must be kept in mind that the fundamentalist movements and organizations do not represent the majority or the greater part of that particular religion. All religions are essentially peaceful, yet with the type of the world we live in, religious hatred and intolerance has become an everyday event, particularly in the postmodern society. Religion often becomes a tool in the hands of powerful individuals in the pursuit of the attainment of their goals. In discussing about unchanging creeds and changing beliefs, it is first important to talk of the secularization theories. The theories of secularization advocate that the development of science, of technology, of urban industrial societies and of the nation state has certain harmful bearings on religious life. As a consequence, societies increasingly run on a non-religious foundation, with the churches losing their social relevance and people also refusing to attend them. What we see today is belonging without believing, that is, belonging to a church for social, spiritual and some other reasons, but having no faith in its teachings and indoctrinations. As Professor David Leon of the Queen's University in Kingston rightly puts, religion has become irrelevant to today's world of spiritualities and seekers. Its existence has become extraneous amidst all our modern ideas of spirituality. The penultimate section of this lecture encompasses an appraisal of postmodernism. This encompasses the critics of postmodernism as well as the critics of postmodernism. Coming to the critics, there are two main points which must be remembered. The first point is a healthy concern about postmodernism's relativism, in which I will speak of the views of Ernst Gellner. The second point is a concurrent sympathy for postmodernism's healthy concern about the limits of reason, where I will speak briefly of Anthony Giddens and his opinion. According to Gellner, postmodernism does not matter much. This is because he believes that just as fashions pass, the trend of postmodernism too is fated for the same. However, he adds that postmodernism is of course important. It is important in the sense that it is a prototype of relativism, and needless to say, relativism does matter. The British sociologist Anthony Giddens, in his critique of postmodernism, has made a very important and unique suggestion. Giddens, in his pursuit of addressing the question of how can commitments to reason be justified in the name of reason alone, has recommended a reassessment or a reconsideration of modernity to overcome its weaknesses rather than instantaneously getting rid of its shortcomings. Coming to the critique of the just stated two critics, you see, regardless of all its shortcomings, it cannot be denied that postmodernism has found its way into popular consciousness. In fact, a large number of people have embraced and still embrace postmodern ideology. This is apparent in various institutions and religious practices of the present day world. Let me take into consideration two very distinct schools of Enlightenment thought, namely the Scottish school and Continental school. It can be seen that while the Scots emphasized more on humility, reason grounded in faith, and a healthy acceptance of human nature, the Continentals believed in a complete denial or complete renunciation of the individual in favor of a greater good. In fact, almost all of the thinkers like Gellner, Giddens, Bauman and Amit have failed to differentiate these two Enlightenment schools. It is now time to wrap up this discussion on the topic religion and postmodernism. Let me encapsulate a few points. You see, the changing waves of modernization, secularization, postmodernism and fundamentalism, as well as their struggles, have largely affected almost all of the world religions like Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism. Lawrence Kaplan reminds us of certain illustrations of fanaticism that are in some form or another linked to violence, illustrations that we see are rampant in the modern world. The struggles that occur among Sikhs, Muslims and Hindus in India are those between Jews and Muslims in Jerusalem prove that fundamentalism and its aftermaths continue even today. What we see today are sweeping shifts in mental models that arise from postmodernist ideas and their effects on religion as well as on religiosity. However, it cannot be speculated how faith have found new forms or how spirituality have found new means of expression. As a matter of fact, it would be more useful to trace the trends and the scaling of everyday experiences rather than making any kind of speculation. Explanations should be sought not in scholarship and philosophies, but in observed actions, participation and unspoken beliefs. So, this was the discussion on the subject of religion and postmodernism. Thank you for attending the lecture. We will meet again in some other discussion on some other topic.